All right, now for the final lesson for the week. We've already talked about the cycles, why they're so important, why biodiversity is important for them, how different factors can affect those cycles, both naturally occurring and human. So now we get down to, well, we don't want to disrupt these ecosystems. We don't want to disrupt biodiversity. So how do we as humans try to keep our impact on the environment as little as possible? Well, that gets us to our final topic, which is what's called sustainability. So we're going to talk a bit about biodiversity and sustainability and how they interact with each other. First, the idea of what is sustainability. Well, basically that just means making sure that abiotic and biotic parts of an ecosystem are maintained. And that can be done in a way so that populations can get the resources they need without risking future generations' resources. Now, sustainable ecosystems do this through a state of balance that is called equilibrium. Right? So without our impact on a particular ecosystem, eventually a balance will be created naturally that will sustain that ecosystem. Populations will have limiting factors that will limit how many of them there are, so that one species doesn't grow out of control and wipe out the entire ecosystem. And that has been happening for billions of years at this point. The only difference at this point is us. Our introduction into these ecosystems has started to disrupt this equilibrium. Now, sustainable ecosystems tend to have a high degree of biodiversity, so that is how these two terms, these two ideas of biodiversity and sustainability, this is how they interact, right? In order for an ecosystem to be sustainable, typically it needs a high degree of biodiversity. And the reason for that is a high degree of biodiversity means that there are a number of different ways that organisms can get the resources they need. The more possible ways to get resources, the easier it is, and that means that an ecosystem can keep a relative balance or equilibrium. Now, we want that. We want these ecosystems to be sustainable. We want these ecosystems to have equilibrium. We want to minimize our impact on these ecosystems. The problem is we're not. We are, at the rate that we are consuming and producing waste, the global ecosystem isn't sustainable. It's not in an equilibrium. It's not balanced. It is not going to be able to sustain life as we know it. So in order to fix that, in order to do something about it, we individually have to take action. So societal change is going to start with changes in individuals. You and I have to change how we consume, we have to change how we produce waste, and we have to try to minimize that on an individual basis, because that is what leads to changes in society. Right? So we have a responsibility to create a more sustainable future. That is part of what living in society is. Right? We have benefits of living in society, but we also have responsibilities. We have a moral and ethical obligation to ensure that not only do we survive, but future generations can survive as well. Now, there are a number of success stories. We have been, as a whole, as a species, humans are trying to make a difference. We are trying to improve things. Not fast enough, but we are. But there are some success stories, and we have some specific success stories here in Ontario. So, for example, the Alfred Bog is a bog that's found in southeastern Ontario. More than 70% of the wetland is actually managed as a nature reserve, so it cannot be mined. The wildlife cannot be hunted, that sort of thing. So it's allowed to survive and reach an equilibrium. Since the 1990s, there have been 4 separate populations of elk that have been reestablished in Ontario. They were hunted to the point where they were no longer found in a lot of areas in Ontario, but we have reintroduced them and have made sure that rules are in place to make sure that they can thrive. Purple loosestrife. is an invasive species. And we already talked about invasive species moving into areas and not having any natural predators or not having any limiting factors that limit their ability to grow and spread. And so purple loosestrife has spread very quickly through Ontario. And the problem with purple loosestrife is it takes up all the resources in the area and it chokes out other naturally occurring plants. So groups have actually introduced a species of beetle. So this is technically, it's another invasive species, but this new species of beetle has been brought in that specifically eats purple loosestrife. And as a result, purple loosestrife is slowly becoming controlled without having to create any other sort of imbalance in the ecosystem. Individuals have also done things at their homes. Some of you may actually have done something like this. So birds, bats, and bees, farmers and homeowners have set up boxes to provide homes for displaced species. The plight of bees, specifically honeybees, in recent years has been a pretty major thing. The global bee population has significantly dropped, and there's been a lot of concern about what the long-term effects of that could be, because bees are very important when it comes to pollination of plants. So the loss of bees is a pretty big deal. So homeowners, farmers, and that sort of thing setting up boxes that will provide a home, or at least a place where bees can build a home, is potentially a help to the long-term issue. Urban sprawl. One of the major issues with cities is they get big, and they get bigger, and they get bigger, and they get bigger. Well, groups have started getting smarter as far as being able to plan how cities grow. And basically the idea is grow up, not out. So instead of having cities continuously get bigger and bigger and bigger as far as the area that they fill, instead a lot of efforts are being made to have larger buildings be built so that more people can still live in the same area by having larger buildings that they can fit into. All right. So there are a number of ways that we have and can continue to build a sustainable future. The question is, are we doing enough? And are there other ways that we could potentially be doing things better? So that's it for this week. Once you have finished going through this lesson, there is a little assignment for you to do. It's doing an ecological footprint so that you can see what your impact on society is as an individual, and maybe start to think about what you can do to make it a little bit better. All right?